Time for the Week 10 starts and sits with Michael F. Florio. Sometimes you got to make very tough choices in your starts and sits. Sometimes those choices are between two guys who are on the same team or one guy who's really good, another guy, we don't know if we want to play him. Start with the running backs. Who we start?
I feel like you were leading into the Lions backfield there. And that's where we're going to go. We're going to say start
We did it.
David Montgomery this week in a favorable matchup. I don't know why, but he had more carries and targets than Jahmyr Gibbs last week, and he has nearly 80% of the goal line carries this season. So when they get near pay dirt, it will be Monty coming in. Plus, the Lions have ran the ball at the second highest rate in the NFL, and I expect them to put up a lot of points in this one. It is a favorable matchup for them. So if game script is on their side, we should get even more David Montgomery than we normally do.
And the people want action. They want names in stardom, sit-em. So give us a name. Who's going on the bench?
Alvin Kamara. It pains me to say it, but for the last couple of weeks in the article, I have been highlighting that in basically every metric that matters, it is a career low for Alvin Kamara. And then he went out last week and had a career low 0.7 fantasy points. He ranks 45th amongst 47 qualified running backs in yards per touch. In the last 7 weeks, he has been a top 25 running back just once. This is a favorable matchup on paper, but until we see more signs of life, I think you could get away ranked.
A rough one for essentially one of the most beloved players in Saints history in Alvin Kamara. Let's go to the wide receivers. Who start?
I think you start Jameson Williams. Theme this week is play your Lions. And I know it's been a disappointing season, but last week, 6 targets. That is the third most he's had in a game this season. The Lions offense looked at its best when they were throwing him the ball, and that's after being vocal about getting him more involved. So Commanders have allowed the 4th most yards on deep passes to receivers. Speed has clearly given that defense fit. I know he is boom or bust, but in this matchup, to me, he is a wide receiver 3 or flex option that you should be looking to get into your lineup. The upside's just too high.
Yeah, we got some more boom or bust players coming up later on in the show, Mike, but let's get another name. Let's give the people somebody who's like, what? We're sitting this guy?
My worst start-sit call in like 5 years that I've written this article was saying to sit DK Metcalf on a Thursday night game where he went off for 3 touchdowns. I get my revenge this week. Not really revenge, but I do think you should be sitting DK because he's averaging less than 6 targets per game right now with a career low air yards per target, and he only has 4 end zone targets. You might remember that long catch and run that he had in London. That equates for 17% of his yearly yards and almost 15% of his yearly fantasy points. And on top of that, the Chargers are bottom 10 in yards allowed to outside wide receivers, and they've allowed just 1 touchdown. Metcalf runs 85% of his routes out wide. And he's not the only big name I'm getting away from at these positions this week. But for that, you got to go over to NFL.com/starts.
Yeah, you got to get the full list. We also got the starts and the sits. We got the tight ends as well as the quarterbacks. We'll start with a start. Who we getting in our lineup, Mike?
CMC's kind of like Severance, getting all the awards and deserves it. Yeah. And for this week, though, we're going to start with Caleb Williams. I mean, he was the QB1 last week. Look, you're not going to get 2 catches, a receiving touchdown, and 40 points. But what I think is going under the radar with his performance is that he ran for 53 yards last week. Plus, the Giants have allowed the 6th most passing yards and 4th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They generate pressure and sacks at a below average rate. If you give Caleb Williams time, I think he will be able to pick apart that Giants secondary. And then MVP candidate Matthew Stafford. In his last 5 games, he has thrown 16 touchdown passes and averaged 23 fantasy points per game. He's top 25 in 4 of those, including when he threw for 389 and 3 touchdowns against this very banged up 49ers defense. The Niners, not only have they allowed the 8th most passing yards, they generate pressure at the lowest rate. And 4 of the last 5 quarterbacks who face them have cleared 19 fantasy points. I think it is a great week to get Stafford in your lineup.
He was having a great 4th quarter in SoFi against that 49ers team. They went with Kyren Williams at the goal line. The ball went the other way. So we'll see how they do this time around. Let's get a sit at the quarterback position, Mike.
You might want
on
this. I think this is a week to potentially get away from Danny Dimes.
No!
Just because the matchup, right? He had his worst game of the year, not fantasy-wise, but I would say performance-wise of the year last year in a game where the Steelers sacked him a season-high 5 times. And this, if you read the column, you know my weekly approach with Daniel Jones. Play him when you do not think he is going to be under a lot of pressure. Unfortunately for him, the Falcons, they've created sacks at the 6th highest rate. They've also allowed the fewest passing yards and 6th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Not a must sit, but if you have another option on your team you like, I would take it.
And that's a rough one because Dimes has been carrying a lot of people's fantasy rosters this season. Let's go to the tight end spot. Who we start?
A lot of people are going to need streaming options this week, and my favorite is Dalton Schultz, who is coming off of one of his best games of the year, but has been more utilized as of late. Fewer than 8 fantasy points just one time since week 3. I think that has gone under the radar. He has scored 11 or more in 3 of his last 4. And then I just like the matchup. The Jaguars, 4th most yards, 2nd in touchdowns and fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So again, if you're streaming this week, going a little bit deeper, Dalton Schultz, someone I like.
As you said, people are going deep, so it's probably harder for you to pick out a sit at the tight end spot. Who's the person who has to go on the bench?
I think David Njoku is someone that you could try to get away from this week. He has topped 50 yards just one time this season. Harold Fannin Jr. has outscored him in 3 straight and in all but 2 games this year. And it goes back to my theory that I just think Dillon Gabriel and Harold Fannin Jr. have a connection going right now, and it's working for them. Unfortunately, that has led to fewer volume for David Njoku. And plus, the Jets, 7th fewest yards allowed to tight ends. And then another name that I think is going to be popular on the waiver wire this week, Luke Musgrave. Going up against the Eagles, we're not sure really how much usage he's going to see in Kraft's absence, or the Packers going to lean more on their wide receiver depth. But besides that, it's a terrible matchup. The Eagles have allowed the 3rd fewest yards and fantasy points to tight ends, have allowed just 1 touchdown. So I'd rather use Loveland, Schultz, Cade Otton, Theo Johnson as streaming options this week over Musgrave.